Duke, you are a very handsome dog. This is Duke. This is his roadmap to success. He's a great dog, and really, he's very well behaved, very well mannered. He has some problems with reactivity to other dogs, as we saw in the video above. This is basically his roadmap to success. So I'm going to start out by talking about all the other things that are going to help him succeed. So the first thing I did is I showed his guardians a leave it exercise. Leave it. Now, I'm saying leave it now. I wasn't doing that originally. What I'm doing at first, I'm just holding the treat up. Now, the guardians probably don't need to practice this, and what you're waiting for is the dog to disengage. Then you give them the treat. Usually what I do then is I go like this. Leave it. So I give him a treat from the other hand, and he doesn't actually get this one. But when I drop it, make sure you drop it like that and get ready to cage it if you need to. I forget where I put the treats. Have a treat ready to go so you're not doing what I'm doing right now. I wasn't planning on demonstrating this, so that's why. So now he's left alone. Leave it. And then I pick this one up. Now, that's actually a good illustration because we went for longer and longer periods of time. That was probably too big of a jump. But at first, it's just we drop it and we put our hand or get ready to do it. And as soon as he disengages, we give him the treat from another, not the treat, we drop another one. And we say the word leave it. Or you could say ignore if you want to use a one-word command. Eventually, we're going to start asking him to leave it for longer and longer periods of time until we can just eventually just drop it from here and not even have to cage it or do that. And he just waits and he looks up at us and waits for us to give him permission. And we don't give him permission to take it. We would just give him another treat from another hand and say, leave it. This way, if you're out on a walk and he sees something, we actually have incorporated a command and taught him what it means and helped him practice that behavior. We also went over a stay exercise. If I forget to put both of these above and you have problems remembering the stay, message me and I can go ahead and I can include one or send you a link to one. Crash is the word that I use for this position. And this is passive training. So he laid down on his own and I immediately, within that 3-second window that I talked about off camera, started petting him and I said the word crash one time. I like to use fun command words. Dogs are the only animals on the planet that can read a human facial expression. So if you have fun command words and you say crash and your dog flops down and your friends laugh, the dog knows it made people happy and that makes everything easier. I also recommend they come up with a naughty dog name. My dog's name is Quest. If I say Quest sit and he doesn't sit and I say Rufus, he sits his butt right down. He knows he's about to get into trouble. So come up with a funny command word, funny name for that. Let me see, what else, what other exercises do we go over? Stay. For the stay, like I said, if you forget how to do the stay, we're going to do for the 3 Ds. First for duration, up to 5 minutes with the dog just right in front of you. And go by very short intervals. And each time, maybe I practice 10 stays in a row, the 11th one, I would toss a treat to the side. When he gets up and licks it, I'm going to say the word bail is his release word. So when he's in a stay, he cannot move until he hears release. Now, if you get from, let's say you're going by 10s, you go 10, 20, 30, and we try to go from 30 to 40, and at 33 he gets up and walks away, then you bring him back over and go back to practicing, and maybe I go to by 7, 14, 21, 28. Always back up a step and then practice out a couple times, and then try to go back to the next step again. The idea is that he needs to perform perfectly before we make the level of difficulty more difficult. And we want to try to get that going with like 3 or 4. We oftentimes say 5 or 5. So we want the dog to do it 5 times in a row before we go to the next level of difficulty. That's for a little bit other exercises. For this one, because we're going to do so many quick little practice that stays, doing that would be a little impractical. But when we practice the stay or the leave it or any exercise for that matter, we want to practice it in different areas in the home. If we only practice in one area, the dog can do it there but won't be able to do it elsewhere. Now, after we practice however many times, we're always going to throw the last one off the side so that they hear bail, and bail means that I can be released. Remember, anytime we get a treat, the treat should go in the mouth first. They should hear the command word after the treat goes in the mouth, directly after. Let me see, what else? We went over the importance of rewarding the dog for desired actions and behaviors. A lot of us train our dogs to misbehave because that's when we give them our attention, by correcting them when they break the rules that we haven't taught them to respect. So we'll talk about the door here in a second. Remind me if I forget. But basically, what we want to do is I break this into 2 pieces. First of all, is called petting with a purpose. Petting with a purpose, that was very beefy. He's farting. Petting with a purpose. The first one is basically when the dog comes up and puts his chin on my leg. Or if he paws at me or nudges at me or barks at me, and I give him attention, he's telling me what to do, and when I do it, he does it. So instead of doing that, what I do is when he comes up and nudges me, instead of following his order, I give him a counter order. Tell him to sit. When he sits, I pet him under his chin, say the word sit, and only the word sit. Not good sit, and not sit, or a long sentence, just sit. If he's already sitting, ask him to lie down, or ask him to come and sit over here. We're just saying if you want attention from the human, you have to do something to change your state to pay for it. After a while, he's going to figure this out, and he's going to start coming up in front of you and sitting down to prepay for attention. When he does, make sure we do recognize and reward him and pet him under his chin, say the word sit. Now, we are also going to use the word paycheck. So if someone comes in the room and sees that someone's petting Duke and Duke's standing, we say paycheck. That does not mean busted, gotcha. Paycheck just means I think you may have forgotten to pet with a purpose. So they say paycheck, and I say, oh, darn, I did forget. Sit, and when he sits, I pet him on his chin and say sit. Or if I had asked him and Dad caught me and Dad came in, I still say sit. Dad, I asked him to sit before he came in the room. When you came down the stairs, he heard me and stood up, and I continued petting him, and David said that's allowed. Now, even if I just want to pet him, I'm still going to ask him to sit or lay down or do something to earn his pay or earn his attention. The more we do this, the easier it will be to get him to sit when there's other dogs around, at the door, and all these other situations. Now, I also went over passive training, which is the absolute easiest way to train any dog. All it is within 3 seconds of the dog doing whatever the action is, we pet him and reward him. So he came over and he laid down. I petted him and said crash. That was a great example of passive training. So if he comes and sits next to me, I reach over and pet him and say sit. He comes to me, I pet him and say come. If he brings me a specific toy, I can say the name of that toy. Now we're creating a vocabulary, which makes it easier for him to understand what we want. And by repeating it in context of when he does it himself, we take away any potential buzzkill. Sometimes we only use commands when it represents the end of fun. So we remember to make sure that's not the case. And it's just a habit. If you get in a habit of petting with a purpose and passive training, which is just rewarding the dog every time it does something you want, every time you pet your dog, it's like a mini training session without even thinking about it. Now, for passive training, I usually say recognize or reward is my watchword for that. So if somebody says recognize to me and I look at the dog and he's standing there, I assume he just came, I'm going to pet him and say come. If he's laying down, I'm going to pet him and say down. Whatever he happens to be doing when I look at him, that just means somebody else saw that I missed an opportunity to reward him and they're reminding me. So I just immediately take their word for it and say sit or whatever it is. Let me see. We also went over the escalating consequences I use to disagree with unwanted actions and behaviors. Remember, this is not to be done when he is above threshold. When he's above threshold, we have to move him away from whatever he's reacting to, sometimes out of sight, and if possible, turn the TV off or turn the volume down or both if it's the TV. If it's a real dog outside, turn around and just walk away. I'm going to actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to show the Guardian how to do, well, I won't do it in here, but basically we're going to probably do some bat training with him later on. We might incorporate some leash skills and stuff like that. But to disagree with the dogs, we want to use the escalating consequences. The first thing we're going to do is hiss 1 time per incident. Number 2 is we stand up abruptly and turn to face the dog. Keep pivoting until the dog is stationary. Stands, sits, or lies down. As soon as he does that, you take 2 steps backwards, left foot, right foot, and then pause for 1/4 of a second. That pause at the end is like a period at the end of the dog communication sentence. Stretch. Something I taught my dog through passive training. The third consequence is when we stand up, we pivot until the dog's stationary. Stands, sits, or lies down, then we take those steps backwards. Third consequence is to march deliberately at the dog. And when I mean march, I mean to have some steam in your step. Don't do this if he's above threshold or he's being aggressive, but if he's being defiant, just walk at him until he turns sideways or greater. As soon as he does, stop. Put your feet together, then go to the second consequence, you're pivoting. As soon as he's stationary, take those 2 steps back, pause for 1 second. The only time this wouldn't apply is if he's somewhere where he's not allowed to be. Let's say that there's a 7-foot boundary in front of me and I'm eating food. He shouldn't be within 7 feet of anyone who's eating food. So if he approaches me and I get up and march at him and he turns sideways right away, but he's still only 3 feet away, he's still too close. So I would keep bumping into him until I got to the 7-foot point. That's when I would stop enforcing the boundary. Now he's going to turn around and go this way. So I'm going to take a step to the side and enforce the 7-foot boundary consistently. After a while, he'll figure out, oh, okay, David wants me to stay outside the 7 foot. Every time I violate the 7 foot, he disagrees. And again, march with him with some steam in your step. He needs to think, I'm going to get run over if I'm still here when the humans get here. The fourth escalating consequence is to put the dog on a leash and step on the leash. And again, this is not something you do when he's above threshold of the dog. But if he's being defined in the house, what I do is I step on the leash about this far away from where it attaches the collar. So in this case, I'm going to step on the leash about that far away from where it attaches to his collar. He's going to jump and spaz out and do all those things. Don't say a word. Don't tell him what to do. Wait. As soon as he sits down on his own, Take your foot, if he sits here, take the foot that's on the leash and slide it with the leash over towards him to take the tension off the leash. Because he's going to sit, it's going to be tension on the leash. And dogs have an opposition reflex. So like programmed to pull against the leash. As soon as he sits, and I don't tell him to sit, I'm waiting for him to do it on his own. When he sits, he's saying, I'm challenging you less. I take my foot and I slide it over with the leash. Then I'm waiting for him to lie down. When he lays down and he's calm and in this sort of energy, then I very subtly take my foot off the leash. Now he has freedom restored. He doesn't realize it because the leash is still attached. Now it's dangerous for a dog to wander around with the dragged leash, so don't let him wander around with it unsupervised. But if a minute or two go by and he starts barking again as he runs by, we step on the leash and reapply the consequence. Or if a couple minutes go by and he's good, well then we can take the leash off. It's not quid pro quo. What we're saying is if you're going to be defiant, you're going to lose all freedom. That's the consequence. Remember, I warned you not to do it by hissing at you before you did the wrong thing. You did it anyway, so I stood up. You did it again, so I marched at you. You did it again, now you're being defiant. So now the consequence is you lose all freedom. If you do these, always start with your hiss, but eventually that's all you'll have to use. And I can also combine them. If I like spilled some drugs, I had surgery or something like that, I spilled some drugs and he started coming towards it, now the strong leave it command will take care of that. But if he was walking towards it, I might hiss, stand up, and rush at him all at the same one. And that's a stronger disagreement by combining them. But always, always, always start with your hiss. Now, for dogs, whoever's in front is perceived to be the leader. And when the guardian was taking him out in the front yard to do some business, and he was standing in front of her at the door and trying to go through the door. So I showed her an exercise on how she can actually practice and teach the dog to stay several feet away from the door. What we did is we broke it down in individual steps. We put the dog sitting on the carpet by the door, but a couple feet away, and then I just reached for the handle several times without even touching it. And every time that he got up, I would stop, put him back into a sit, come back and reach, till I could do that several times in a row. He stays seated. Then I did that and grabbed the handle. As soon as I grabbed the handle, he got up. So again, we're breaking in and teaching him each individual step. When you hear this sound, I still want you to stay seated. And so we stop at any point that he does the wrong thing, reset, and go back to that step. Practice each step over and over. By the time she actually opened the door and walked through, he was like, oh, we're going outside? And when he passed the threshold, you might want to give him a treat and say the word yard or front and back. Come up with fun command words. But now he stays there. You go open the door, and you're letting your guests in and out. We don't have to worry about the dog running out the door. He's developed more self-control, and that's an important thing. Delaying gratification whenever possible and asking the dog to delay is a great way for them to develop more self-control and self-restraint. Do that, and also if there are other activities, break them down into individual steps and help him practice each individual step. Now, one of the guardians here is an overachiever, super achiever. And so she's going to want to push things a little bit further, a little bit faster than we'd like. Now, we all want to get to the same place, but if we move without a good foundation in place, everything's going to crumble beyond it. So we want to make sure that before we move to that point, or if anybody sees the super achiever, then we just say SA, and not SA like SA, but SA means super achiever. You're moving too fast. And that person needs to stop and recognize, okay, well, I'm going to back up. And it's good to move, and it's good to have goals. But for dogs, this is one of the more common mistakes people make, is they move too far, too fast, and the dog's not ready for it. Now, remember, anything your dog is doing when we pet it is what we're reinforcing, including excitement or nervousness or anxious. So if he's in anything other than a balanced state of mind, we're not going to pet it. If he's nervous, I can touch and let him know I'm here with him without amplifying it. But as soon as I start petting him, I'm going to make him 1/5 of a percentage point more excited each time we come in. And each time this happens over and over, it's going to be more and more. Now, I filmed a video. We're not going to have it posted because I have a bunch of videos for this on my website, and I think the other video above is more important for this family. But I showed the guardians how they can actually step on the leash when people come through the door to teach him to settle himself down. So what I would do is, before we have a gathering here in this house once a month where a lot of family members come. So before that gathering, I maybe send an email the day before and explain to everybody that we don't want to come in the door unannounced. We want to call or text so-and-so. And there's a bunch of members of this family, so maybe we have one person who's in charge, and that's the person all the guests coordinate with. And that way, that person calls, we put them on the leash, we step on the leash, give them about 3 feet of leash, and then put a piece of tape, so the dog can get most of the way, but can't get all the way to the tape. Person comes in, they stay sideways to the dog, and we just wait for the dog to settle down. And while he's doing this, nobody's interacting with the dog. Everybody else is staying, and the guests are already here to stay away. And then as soon as the dog settles down, we turn to face the dog, and we start going underneath to pet him under his chin. And as soon as you turn towards him and go like this, he's going to get up and start wiggling. Step backwards, so you're back outside of his reach, and turn sideways again. And we wait. As soon as he settles down, then we go back. So you're going to have a lot of this back and forth. And especially if we have a whole bunch of guests over like they do, that's going to really give him a lot of practice over and over again, repping it. Careful, your finger might be creeping in the deal a little bit. I think your next one, your middle finger. There we go. I'll watch it later. I'll see a little bit of a halo. Okay, so the more that we practice that, eventually it teaches the dog to calm himself down. And also the leash and the being out of range teaches him not to jump up on people. When a dog jumps up on a guest who arrives, that's a way of saying, look, I'm in charge around here. I'm claiming you as my property. Either one of those aren't ideal for this guy. Let me see. The Guardians are doing a great job of feeding him. Some of the rules we went over, make sure you enforce these rules consistently. So not being allowed on the furniture is a rule the Guardians already have. Having to sit at the door. So I go to the door and I say, sit. Count to 3 in my head. If he doesn't sit within 3 seconds, I walk away, turn the TV on, don't stand next to him, sit down, pull out a magazine, act like you're preoccupied. Wait 1 minute, go back to the door and tell him to sit again. And tell him, don't ask him. If he doesn't do it this time, I walk away for 2 minutes. Next time for 4 minutes. Next time for 8 minutes. So each time I double the length of time. At first do whatever direction he wants to do, then we want to do both directions. Now right now, because he jumps over the fence and we have neighbors with dogs, he is not allowed to go in the backyard freely. And so I think he's very much under-exercised. Not that the Guardians don't want to, but they're being responsible. They don't want him to get into trouble. So I went over a little trick that I have to elevate the height of the fence in the backyard. So the Guardians, if they forget, don't know where to get it or whatever, message me. I can text you a picture of this stuff. But it's basically fencing that's 50 yards long. It's I think 3 feet wide. What I do is if this is the fence, I overlap it, so I'm extending the fence to like 7 feet. And then I get these posts. I put them up make sure they put the posts pretty frequently because the fence is not going to have a lot of rigidity like a chain link fence will. And then I zip tie them together. Make sure you zip tie them good so he can't get his nose underneath them. I usually put the overlap on your side of the fence, but if you're worried about him going there, you could theoretically put it on the other side of the fence as well. And I would check with your neighbors before you do this, but any neighbors that have dogs, I would go get some bamboo reed matting. They make like blinds of this bamboo, and then run it along the fence and just tell your neighbor, look, the behaviors told us that if our dog can't see your dog, that's going to help. We're going to put this matting up just temporarily while we're working with him on this stuff. And just didn't want you to think, we don't like you, Bob. We love you, Bob. We just don't want our dog to be barking at your dog. And Bob's going to be like, hey, I appreciate you taking the time to let me know. And then now the dog can't see the other dog. It's going to be this is what we call maintenance. This helps the dog get out of practice. Otherwise, he's probably just standing waiting in that part of the fence line, waiting for that dog to come in. Now, we also have a couple windows in the house that kind of overlook either the backyard or the front yard. So what I recommended to go into like Kinko's or Office Max, getting a roll of paper, not a roll, but just measure it out and put little sections, flop is what I call it when the dog goes on its side. On the windows, at the bottom of the window. So the dog goes to the window, he can no longer see out. But the humans can see out because we're standing, and it's just paper, so it just really acts as a filter, so sunlight still comes in. A lot of people will close their blinds, but then your house looks like a dungeon, and you can't enjoy your own view. We do this for about a month, maybe a couple months if we need to, and get the dog out of a habit of going there over and over again. Eventually, he'll stop doing it. But we have to have at least 30 days of not being able to do that. I would maybe get the X mats, the little plastic mats that have nubs on it I mentioned for the couches when the Guardians are gone. And I would also probably put some of them on that little stoop by the front window. You could also put tape down tinfoil. Most dogs don't like tinfoil temporarily, and each day maybe fold over like half an inch on each side, and eventually get smaller and smaller. But he probably won't go up there anymore. So if you block it and have the tinfoil on the little shelf, now I can't go to what is essentially a guard dog tower, is the kind of, I think, how he looks at it. And I think he thinks he's already had some bad problems with dogs in the past, but I think because he didn't have any rules or structure, this is how I can contribute to the group around here by protecting the humans from any of these dogs in the neighborhood. Well, we don't need him to do that. We want him to not practice that while we work on rehabilitating with all these other things. Other rules: not being allowed to go in the kitchen, can't go through the door ahead of you. If you're walking up and down the stairs, she should walk after you. I also showed the Guardians how they can teach the dog to have to go to the dog bed on command. Every room that we hang out in should have a dog bed and a different name for each one. So that way we can direct him and say, go to Acapulco. And he knows where Acapulco is. It means this bed, Cabo's this bed, Cancun's that bed, or whatever you want to name them. Let me see. To help yourself out, at the doors, put a little Post-it note on the door that says, sit equals out. put a note of Acapulco above the dog bed over Acapulco. So that way you kind of have these visual reminders that help you. Maybe, you know, in the kitchen, you know, no dog equal cooking or whatever it is. So there's a lot of people in this house that'll help for the guardians, but sometimes we find ourselves in old our neural pathways have aligned, and we find ourselves in old habits. So the more we can practice these things in a way that we want to, the easier it's going to be for the dog to get to figure these things out. Am I forgetting anything else? All right. Well, now the Guardians are probably going to sign him up for our BAT training courses, which is a class that we do for dogs who are aggressive towards other dogs or people. He doesn't have any problems with people unless they have glasses or they're fearful of him. But the more of those funny commands we do, and the more that we teach him to sit, to ask for attention through petting with the purpose of passive training, then eventually people show up and they're like, your dog just will go and sit in front of people like, oh my God, your dog's so well behaved. You're like, of course, we hired David from Doggone, he came out. But we're just teaching our dog to behave well, and we have fun command words, and the other people come into it and they're like, wow, that must be a fun, happy dog. It's not a dog that's named Killer that's wearing a prong collar. That makes me think I probably shouldn't be petting you. All right, well, this is Duke, and you can see he's a very high energy dog. Yes, this is Duke's roadmap to success. Remember, everything you do trains your dog, only sometimes you mean it.